Move on to our next conversation, which is a conversation about the future of online freedom. When I was thinking about this panel and based on our conversations, I was reminded of what I thought was always sort of an eloquent characterization that Vint Cerf gave to the internet when he described it as, or explained that by placing intelligence at the edges rather than control in the middle of the network, the internet provided a platform for innovation. And I always like that because I think too often people think about online freedom as sort of a luxury or an add-on to the experience rather than sort of the essential operating form of how the thing runs. So we're very happy today to not only have two very important figures, but figures representing two of the most important organizations in this space to have a conversation about where we go from here on with online freedom. So the first is Peter Eckersley. Peter is Chief Computer Scientist for our friends at the Electronic Frontier Foundation, where he leads a team that sort of identifies new technologies that may be a threat to online freedom, and then if I can be so bold, says, we'll say they then try to crush those. And through that work, they have developed a number of different projects and tools, including just a few: Let's Encrypt, CertBot, HTTPS Everywhere, and the SSL Observatory. So thank you to Peter for being here today. And then also, obviously, we have Brewster, Kahle, who is the founder and digital librarian of the Internet Archive. As many of you know, Internet Archive, obviously, but it's just such a good tagline and mission, we should repeat it everywhere we can, has the goal of providing universal access to all knowledge. Just a little thing that they work on every day. And to that end, it provides free access to absolutely as much media and information that it can, supports the Wayback Machine, and I think it's, at least the latest I saw, 5 billion archived web pages, which is a large
500
number.
billion.
What's that?
500 billion.
Oh, my card says 500 billion. I've lost the ability to count. So thanks to Brewster as well for being here. So I want to start this way because I think not only do a lot of the discussions about online freedom tend in a bad direction, but for those of you who have been here all day, my first panel this morning, I think may induce some nightmares about terrorism and all of that. So I want to provide a little fodder for people's dreams to replace those nightmares. And so here's the question I'd like both of you to ask. So in the good place, if we go in the right direction with this and end up with an internet that is firmly and for a long term supporting robust online freedom, what does that look like? What do we have to do to get to that place? So Peter, do you want to take the first stab at that?
Sure. So the internet, of course, is a utopian technology. It's a planet-wide utopian project that's kind of entering its middle age. And a lot of things that were like free and could be modified easily 20 years ago, we're now kind of living with established legacy technologies and large institutions. And so I think that the types of freedom we were fighting for 20 years ago are still the same types, but it's a different game. And the biggest pieces of that, I think, that we see, one is a nexus around surveillance and censorship. Those two things are linked. And there's a big fight about getting the encryption right for the internet so that we can hold back the incredible levels of surveillance planet-wide that we learned about in the last few years, and also censorship that's becoming a growing problem in many parts of the world, not so much the United States. And so, we've worked on that through projects like HTTPS Everywhere and Let's Encrypt, TLS deployment, but those are ongoing projects. We're really only halfway there. There are other struggles around innovation and openness. Whether that's network neutrality, software patents, or the ability to change the protocols of the internet. I think the quick talk that we heard about earlier is actually really exciting because it's actually very hard to put new protocols out there on today's network, and it's great to see people struggling to do that and succeeding because it's a sign that we can still innovate. Things aren't totally locked down. And then I guess the third big bundle of freedoms I think we really care about right now is the freedom to choose in terms of privacy, tracking, and ads on the web. And so that's something we've wound up being involved in through Privacy Badger, through Do Not Track. It's great to be working with organizations like Brave, like Mozilla, trying to to build a version of the web that respects consent and allows new experimentation with business models, maybe still advertising, but like privacy-friendly versions of advertising, as well as other types of business models that haven't really been properly invented or haven't succeeded yet.
Brewster, what do you think the future looks like, and how's the internet put together if it's supporting online freedom in a robust way?
Yeah, it's easy to come up with dystopian futures. In fact, maybe we're living in one of them.
And we'll probably get to those later in the conversation.
Right.
I just want to start on the positive.
Yeah, but there's a growing group that thinks we can lock the web open, that we can make openness irrevocable. How can we make it so that we can have reliable internet, a private internet, and World Wide Web, and still be fun and frolicky, right? In the current world, I'd say we have 1 out of 3. It's fun. The web is fun. It's mutatable. It's, you can do weird and wonderful things. It's a bizarre, awesome utopia. But it's not reliable and it's not private. Can we do this? And the answer is yes, and there's a growing group building this. It's a decentralized web. Can we make it such that the web evolves smoothly into the future using a JavaScript layer to make it so that websites live everywhere and nowhere, so that you can't go and just sit in front of WikiLeaks, find all the people that are using it, pass it the NSA, and they up the problems for them, which happened. Is there a way of doing this that we can go and make it so the peer-to-peer infrastructure that makes it so that websites are multi-homed? We'd have versions. We'd have reliable. It would be able to go around firewalls and the like. It would work well in a semi-detached area, which is where 1 to 2 billion of the world work. It would help protect privacy, and it would still be fun and frolicky. So this sort of idea of building a decentralized web is actually, I think, a way to make a better web on top of the existing web without selling our souls.
Okay, so you obviously have the right to provide a longer answer, but I'm also happy to take a one-word answer on this one. So if we get to the decentralized web, if we sort of take the tools, Peter, you're talking about and get them properly implemented, can we have a world in which these layers of monitoring that you're talking about, on one level maybe a national security layer, another a commercial ad-based layer, and then also just sort of a malware attack layer, could we get to a world where you could have an online experience that doesn't sit under those layers of monitoring? Is that a realistic goal?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, good. So
I'm going to put a footnote there, and you can ask me about the footnote, but yes.
Okay, well, we'll see if we have time to read the footnotes at the end. But so then let me ask you this. So to get from here to there, though, there will be resistance, right? Because the folks who are operating those security layers and the commoditization layers will be able to monetize and characterize the value that they're bringing through those exercises. So I'm sure both of you do this. Brewster, I know you do this all the time. What are the talking points, or what's the pitch as to the value of the open online experience that you can use to sort of make the argument against those value pitches coming in the other direction?
We live in a really weird time, and a completely great time, where there's an idea of universal education is almost universally thought of as a good thing, that access to information is thought of as a good thing. Historically, there's not all that much time that's been about. But right now we have. So the idea of universal access to all knowledge wins arguments in China, in Russia, in the United States, and the like. And our opportunities to deliver on that promise. That was some of the promise of the World Wide Web. And frankly, we haven't. We've made a kind of a weird hybrid kind of place. But I think we can go and step up and deliver.
Okay. Peter, any thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, I think part of your question you're asking is, does not the need to earn revenue and profit inexorably lead to certain kinds of architectures? And the answer historically has clearly been not necessarily. We've been able to build an internet that is a complex interplay between, sure, corporations with various types of business models, but also public institutions, universities, institutions like Wikipedia or the Internet Archive or Mozilla that actually, to varying degrees and in complicated ways, do represent the public interest. And so I think the internet will always be like that.
I thought I had the premise of the question, then you walked back there a little bit, because I was going to say, so to those who would say there's no turning back, the internet is just too wrapped up with some of these functional elements that trying to get to a future that you untie from that, is going to be too difficult. I was taking what you both were saying and saying, no, there is an ability to untangle ourselves from that sort of history, but I think there at the end, you were conditioning that a little bit. So to what extent do you think part of that, those parts of the internet might always be with us? Or
Well, let's take a case study, right? So one of the big questions is, how do you pay for the web? And the answer that we've come up with through a very broken process has been through commercial surveillance and advertising thus far. And that's actually kind of not a good enough answer. I don't think it's one that works for large portions of our species, for large numbers of publishers. And so to try and reopen that conversation, the thing we've been doing is building technologies like Privacy Badger and working with tracker blocking companies and organizations across the whole spectrum, saying we're going to actually adopt a standard of blocking all of these third-party trackers and advertising things until they commit to honoring Do Not Track in a strong and meaningful way. And when they do, we'll unblock them. And the purpose of doing all of this is to create an incentive that wasn't present beforehand for those advertising companies to do some hard work, to hire talented computer scientists and programmers to go and build a version of the advertising ecosystem that actually respects the principle of consent and doesn't collect people's reading habits when they say, no, you do not have permission to stalk me around the web. When they get that message, the advertiser has to go and say, all right, we're going to throw the data about you into an anonymized data structure that we can't fish it back out from. We can still show pretty relevant, pretty targeted ads, but based on this like fancy computer science that we're doing. So no incentive to invest in that technology right now, but if there's 20 million or 100 million users out there blocking your ads because you didn't do this, now there's an incentive to hire those programmers and get it right. Now, that's just about the advertising piece. The other part of this problem is getting other business models to thrive, whether that's something like Flatter or micropayments, whether it's Kickstarter, which is and crowdfunding, which is a new and exciting kind of thing that's appeared in the last 5 years, or whether it's other stuff we haven't even thought about. We're in the United States, we'll never do it this way, but in Europe, they're used to having public funding. Every time you borrow a book from a library in Europe, the government pays the author and the publisher a significant amount of money. Like, the Europeans should be trying that for the web. So all of these things should be experiments we're trying more. And we need to create space for that.
Okay. So Brewster, let me now drag you back maybe to the here and now. We've sort of painted the picture of where we could go, but we still live in a world where I think on one of the panels earlier today, they mentioned that 1 out of every 3 users of the internet globally has content censored, before it gets to them. Yeah. And I think there are threats of that going in the bad direction, that maybe more countries would start to create their own sort of patchwork of regulation and censorship and those sorts of things. What do you see as the ways in the short term that either, working through nation states or working through other groups, we can sort of hold that progress at bay before we start to push it back?
Oh, it's starting to get really messy out there. So the Internet Archive is now blocked in China and has been for quite a while, I think because we have 1 or 2 videos up. And when we made the whole Internet Archive HTTPS, they couldn't just go and select those things, and so they just block out the whole thing. We blink on and off in Russia. India sort of went after us for a while, and it was like, Jesus, guys. So this sort of blocking and having huge hunks of the web go away because probably some random bureaucrat said, it's not good enough. This is not a good way to run a culture. We've got something really wrong. And we also have other forms of balkanization that are sort of, it's these platforms that are really starting to sort of slice us up, whether it's Twitter, Facebook, or the like. Or, my favorite device is this, and it's closed every which way since Sunday. So if we really lose by not making the World Wide Web evolve in an open and interesting and trustable way, I think people will retreat down into some little safe gardens that is sort of, okay, not as sort of wild and woolly, but sort of in that AOL sense of, oh, it's safe. And that would be a hell for me, right? I would have spent my career for a loss. So I think we need to upgrade what we've got and make the open world work. And it's work for everybody everywhere. And fortunately, we got the technology, and better yet, we have the people in the room. Right? This is still, it's a San Francisco-based phenomenon. And if we were to go and pull together a bit, we'd actually be able to pull off some changes. It is possible to put in new protocols. There is possible to go and make something work around some of these obvious problems and still get people paid.
I think if you talk about balkanization, talking about the nation-state version of balkanization and censorship first, China is a special case. China has shown a willingness to completely unplug itself from large parts of the rest of the world's internet, to block Google, to block Facebook, to block CloudFlare, to block Amazon.
To take those drastic steps as part of an industrial policy, in part, to then promote its own domestic alternatives to services. And that's a terrible outcome for the world, really, right? Like, you know, we truly don't use the same tools or speak the same protocols or interact in the same spaces as the Chinese population. Fortunately, no other country has been able to follow China's path here. Iran perhaps has tried. You know, there was a week where they blocked Gmail and tried to move everyone to their national email service, and the members of their own parliament rebelled against that. And so that may be a phenomenon of scale in some ways. Like, China is enormous and sophisticated, and it can afford to build its own version of Twitter, its own version of everything. So I think we need to, and in other places I hope we can hold the line. With encryption, the encryption says, yeah, you either let the archive in, you either let the Wikipedia in, you either let Google in, or you let none of it in, and people say, yeah, we'll take the internet, we'll share our conversations with the world. And hopefully there's one day a way to bring China back in from the cold, but that's going to have to be a political process, not a technical process.
So Brewster, I want to go back and push you a little bit on that. Is there, you know, you certainly identified the threat and the problems. Do you see tools right now that are available to keep, you know, the dominoes falling? You mentioned, you know, India was sort of there, and other countries that may follow, or this trend towards closed tech platforms that might sort of wall folks off from each other. Is there a way to sort of slow that progress, or do we just need to hurry up and get to a decentralized internet, get to, you know, greater encryption to sort of beat them to that, or is there something incremental we can do?
There's something on every level, and that we really need to be moving on, right? We can't go and rest on our laurels. Hey, TCP/IP, it's excellent, great, we won the open world, right? It's not SNA or DECnet or some other piece of crap. It works, but we still have to defend every one of these levels, and sometimes the attack comes from some other place, like the number of tier 1 providers is getting to be fewer and fewer. The net neutrality thing is a real problem. The content industries are often very persuasive to go and put in place really weird things like linking problems that they're now having in Europe, where it can be illegal to link to another site. These are problems. So I think there's lots of engagement points that we can do, as long as we keep an idea of let's have lots of winners. As long as we don't feel like we're going to become the monopoly winner by going and having everybody else lose, if we think of it as kind of a big boat that we have to make float, then there are our own wars, our own policy aspects. The supporting, please donate to EFF, donate to public knowledge in Washington, D.C. Try to start some of these things in other countries, such that there's political will. There's lots of different levels that we really need to keep this thing open. The decentralized web is just the web level, and then we have these other characteristics. Let's make lots of winners.
Okay. So I'm going to, one more question, and then we'll open it to the crowd, so start to think about any questions you might have. So I have to be fair. May not be balanced, but I'll be fair. Since I asked the folks from Washington this morning who work on counterterrorism how they could reconcile, you know, their you know, how they often operate without being transparent, or all that, you know, how they would embrace transparency. Let me ask you this. Is there a place, even in this open web, for some sort of controls against the bad actors that might try and take advantage of the platform? Are there some things and some ways in which effectively the future of the open internet can control some of the worst abuses in a way that doesn't thwart its growth?
Oh, common sense and capitalism have a way of surviving. I think right now we've got such a a swap over into a land of everything's surveilled, everything's just, it kind of feels creepy out there. And we have a long way back before we have the, maybe it's a libertarian dream of no potential influence and actors. I think actually a lot of how the Washington, D.C. has worked on some of this is they've come and met with people like the Internet Archive and a bunch of the people probably in this room, these different organizations, and they said sort of, hey, we're not going to bring the law down on you, but there's a problem. And we've tried to work through and at least talk through and have open conversations, and that's actually been working a whole lot better than some of the thuggery that we saw after September 11th.
Any specific examples of how that's been working? Or
yeah. So the Internet Archive hosts materials. It's a free hosting, so you can upload things, books, music, video, whatever. And there's a lot of materials on there that the people are unhappy about. And sometimes we look at it from the American perspective and make judgment calls because we're an American entity. And there are some things that, close-up beheadings and the like, that we snuff, we just take off the Internet Archive. But there are other things that are sort of more judgment calls that are recruiting type videos and the like. And how much do we want to be part of their distribution system? We want to keep them up because it's a historical record, so we make some speed bumps. We're not part of a distribution network or a publishing arm. We're a library. And that when things move outside of the library sphere, we can bring it back into that by remembering who it is we are, what we're trying to do. And some of this has been in conversation with others, and where there's good balances that seem to come out of it all.
Peter?
It feels like you're asking several different questions at once, perhaps. And one of those questions might be, should there be a golden key, a backdoor, into Apple's crypto or the web's crypto? And the answer to that question is no.
Yeah.
We're having enough trouble keeping the internet secure without a backdoor. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
But there are other questions. And for the hackers in the room who buy into Brewster's vision of a new peer-to-peer decentralized web, we're going to use HTML5, WebRTC, these new technologies to build, not a client-server architecture so much as a peer-to-peer architecture for new cool things. We have to remember that there are reasons that the centralized architectures have been winning. There are reasons why Apple's devices, iOS devices that I think of as beautiful crystal prisons, that people are liking these things. And so when we go to design decentralized alternatives, we need to match the quality and the game of the centralized systems. And there are a few things that we're going to have to get right. So one is, in terms of spam and malware, the people who build centralized giant models with lots of data can do a great job of recognizing that stuff. We're going to need to train machine learning models, really good ones, on giant piles of data and figure out how to push them down into every device in a decentralized network if we want that network to actually be secure and non-spammy and usable for ordinary humans. Similarly, for a whole pile of other problems, there's a convenience and an economy of scale to going into a single giant cloud infrastructure. And so if you want to build something else, you've got to understand on day one what you're up against in terms of those problems and have a plan before you start work.
Great. Okay, do we have questions from anyone in the audience? Brewster's laid out common sense so clearly that everybody can go out into the streets and tell that gospel. If not, I don't want to stand in the way of our next session. I think we've been doing well. Do we have one question here quickly? Do we have the microphone?
So just to kind of loop this back to the very first chat with the government representatives who kind of brought in that point about their, the kind of interplay that this open dialogue, discussion, debate, whatever, about security, encryption, and making fighting terrorism more difficult. What you just said, what's your view? You look at ultimately maybe you can challenge my statistics here, but maybe the amount of people who have died in terrorist acts are lower than car accidents. Do you just view that as a acceptable cost for freedom in society?
Let me talk about my footnote. Yeah. So we can keep our communications secure even against intelligence agencies, but only in the following sense. We can protect people's conversations by default. We can stop what we call dragnet surveillance, the kind of surveillance that was revealed by Edward Snowden, where there was a copy of all of your conversations sitting in a database at GCHQ or NSA, and there's a query that can be run against that. And maybe some intelligence agent needed to get a warrant to see the results of the query, but they'd see there are 7 results in someone's inbox. Going, like, they were talking about this topic, click here to go and open that person's inbox. We can change that to a world where intelligence agencies need to actually pick their targets. Once they pick a target, we probably can't help you against a multi-billion-dollar surveillance effort. We don't have tools to make devices secure enough for that. And so that is a saner place for democracies to draw the line. If you have an investigation of a clearly suspected terrorist, go and bug their house. Okay, get a warrant to do that. We can't stop you from firing 0 days at their devices, but leave the rest of your democratic society's population alone, please. And that's the place where we think the line should be drawn. Now, the second point you were talking about in terms of casualties, Congress has asked the NSA and the intelligence community directly, how many acts of terrorism have been thwarted, for instance, by the massive mobile phone metadata collection programs in the United States? And the answer has ultimately looked like it's 0. These programs that are so intrusive haven't actually been producing the results they were supposed to produce. You stop terrorist acts by knowing who the terrorists are, following them around, studying what they're up to, and using human methods.
So, and I used to, I'm a big data guy. So the idea of having, throwing away anything sort of seems bad, right? Usage is going to be, but we tried an experiment. We said, at the Internet Archive, why don't we throw away the IP addresses of the users coming in? But we still want to be able to go and count how many different users there are. So we hash all of our incoming IP addresses in our logs as the time we write them, so we can count how many different people. We don't know where they're coming from with the countries and things like that, but we know a bunch of types of marketing type things, and it's working just fine. That you can basically scale back a little bit of this sort of keep everything. I think of these logs as just toxic waste. It's just stuff is piling up. It's really very nice to have very short conversations with some people that come knocking on the door sometimes secretly and say, we need to know this about this person. It's like, we don't know, and they could turn away and go away. And it's actually a real blessing to sort of, and it's not like we filtered it out or we tried to deny it from them. We just didn't record it, and it works really very well. So there are ways that we can step back from the sort of detritus that we've built into our technologies, and it doesn't hurt. It doesn't hurt.
Well, listen, I don't think this could have been a much better late afternoon conversation, so please join me in thanking Peter and Brewster for their time. Thank you.